And welcome back. We are now going to go ahead and get ready to get using multiple materials on our objects. We've already seen how to go ahead and use materials. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. And we have our friendly little cube here. And we're going to go down to our materials section here. And I want to go ahead and rename this. And let's just go ahead and, for example, choose red, because it's very easy just to go ahead and make a color. And we want to go ahead and drink this all the way in so we get a nice good red value here. All right, make that 1. Perfect. Now, of course, you see we don't have that applied quite yet. Let's go ahead and change our view. If you remember right now, we're looking at this through the viewport shading. And let's go ahead and bring this on over so it gets more of that 3D view here. And you can see our materials have been applied. Now, what's if we wanted to make another cube in here? So we want to go ahead and add in here another cube. So let's go ahead and do another mesh, do a cube. And let's go ahead and just move this guy so that way he is now longer on top of him. So I'm just going to use my move. And let's just go drag him right on over just so we can look at him. And maybe I'll pull him forward just a little bit. And you'll notice that he doesn't have the same materials as the first cube. All right, we of course can come here and add those materials very easily. Just come here and add red. I can of course remove this material, so I can just go ahead and delete that right out there, or clear it out, or press Ctrl Z. Let's go ahead and just reset that. Now, one thing I want to show is that if we were to go ahead and hit new, all right, you will see that we have the material pop up, which is great. And we want another new material. I can hit another new material here, and you can see how those will just keep adding. So if I go back and look at my cube, you'll see how we have different materials in here. And of course, I can just hit new material, which just adds a new material. And all that's going to do is keep adding it. But if you notice, if we go here in our drop down, we of course can change that to those different views. Now, one interesting thing is if you come in here and you have a material in here and you say, you know, I don't want these materials, I can go ahead and just remove these materials. And you'll see they'll stay here in our material list. But what's if we wanted to add those multiple materials to the different faces? So if I start hitting add new material slot, one thing you'll notice is that it doesn't simply try to add it as a new material option down here. Instead, it adds this to the list of materials. Now, we can, of course, from this material slot, for example, come here and assign it the value of red. And I could create a new material value here. So let's just go ahead and let's make this one blue. You will notice that if I go ahead and apply this, the blue layer, because it's on top, is overriding the red layer. And if I want to change which one is currently visible, I can use these arrow keys here to move that up and down. So if I move the blue down, you see that red is now taking precedence in this layer panel. Now you might wonder, how do I get this in here? Well, if I remove this blue off of here, if I go ahead and just delete this completely out of here, all right, you will see that we do, of course, get the red layer here back being present. But of course, we lost that color here, all right? So it's not really applying the color that we wanted to because it's just defaulting back. So I actually need to go ahead and remove this layer here. So let's go hit the minus key here, and you'll see it's now red. And so that gives us a little bit of background here for what we need to do in order to get these multiple materials. So I'm just going to leave this one here kind of as a reference, and let's move back to our original cube to go ahead and get ready to start applying those multiple materials. So how do we get this into the various different ways we want? Well, if you remember, we're in object mode right now. If we change this over to edit mode, we of course can have a lot more control, and you'll notice that material screen has changed. We now have the ability to assign, we can select, and we can deselect. And that's going to be very useful as we move forward. Now, before we get into this, one thing I want to show, if I go ahead and modify the red value here, you'll notice that it modifies this for any other color that has that same material. And so keep that in mind as we move forward here. All right, so with our red back, and we have that all set up, let's go ahead and get this to where we want it to be. Which if we go ahead and remember, we're in our object selection mode, we want to go ahead and create material layers that are going to represent those other materials that we want to do. So for example, if I want to create a new material on this layer, let's go ahead and name this one blue. And we'll go to this layer, do a new one. Let's go ahead and name this one yellow. And we already saw what happens when materials are sharing the same name. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a new material here, and let's call this one green. All right, you can maybe start seeing where this is going here now with our different layers set up here. But let's go ahead and make sure we assign the proper colors here. So I want to do kind of a blue for this one. And then we'll go to yellow. And then of course, let's go to green. All right, so that's giving us some nice colors that we can work with here. But how do we actually apply from here onto our object? Well, to do so, it's actually pretty easy. Now, this is going to draw on some of our prior skills. If you remember up here in edit mode, we have the ability to select. Right now, we're on vertex, but what if we go to face select? And if I'm on face select, I can choose to select one of these faces. And when I do that, you'll see that my material is highlighted here for what material I want that face to be. And you'll see that right now, this material is red. But what if I click the top one here and I say, you know, I want this to be blue. So if I click on blue and then I click assign, you'll see that it is now assigned the color blue to the top of this cube. All right, that's pretty neat. Let's go ahead and just see this in action for some of the other sides. So let's go ahead and pick another side. I'm going to assign that yellow, and maybe I'll assign this side to green. All right, and so you can start seeing how this is going to be very handy with multiple materials. Now, one thing I do want to point out is how we can go ahead and select different things. So for example, if I go to my red materials and I go ahead and click on select, you will see that it selects every face that's here on this cube that is currently red, which is a pretty helpful way, because then if, let's say, I want to change all these red faces, let's just say we wanted a new material slot here, and let's just go ahead and name this one, let's say white. All right, and we come down here, okay, here's our base color. We know this is white right here, that's pretty good. And so I want to make these all white. So now with white on here, I can assign that, and you'll see that it has now made all the red faces white. Again, pretty neat. Now I'm just going to go ahead and change this one face right here. Let's go ahead and change our face value back to red and assign that, just so we got a little color variation here. And looks like I might have accidentally grabbed a green. No problem. We can just reassign it, and you can see that is pretty quick and easy to manage. Now, if we look at our other cube that we have here, if we go ahead and select on this guy and we go right into edit mode on him. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop right on over here to this cube, switch it over to object mode, click on him, go back into edit, and you can see we only have one material, so we of course can just go ahead and reassign these as we want. But of course we only have that one layer, so we don't have as many properties as we would if we had on this one. One last thing I want to talk about is, of course, here in my materials, if you notice, we have some different options. So you can see, for example, we have this 0 here next to our materials. So these materials, that 0 means it is currently not being used by Blender. And because it's not being used, that means that it's potentially not going to be kept. So one thing to keep in mind is if these materials exist and Blender sees them and you save it and you come back and you reopen your file, you may lose these materials. So it's sometimes a good idea to make sure you save and assign them to something. It doesn't mean that they're going to be tossed, but it just means that this material right now is not being used by any object here within our current environment.